What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, my people? How are we doing on this beautiful Thursday? Hopefully everyone's having a great day, great morning, and getting ready for a little Thursday night football. We have an excellent game. The 7-2 Eagles host the 7-3, one of the stories of the year, Washington Commanders. So we will dive in on some thoughts on this game. We had some breaking news this morning that Anthony Richardson will now go back to become the starting quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, who had surgery that ended his season, needed another surgery. Not ideal. Darren Rizzi, the special teams coordinator, who kind of looks like a college wrestler or a UFC fighter from 15 years ago. He has some like Ken Shamrock vibes. Gave some interesting quotes today that I read. The 49ers made a big contract extension with one of their young stud players, and just kind of what it represents, something that the trade deadline was recently. And we argue a lot over late round picks. And I think it's a good example why people can be frugal when it comes to not giving those up, for proven players during the season. And then something I saw today in terms of the business of football, it always interests me. I love the business of football in general, college or pro. That's why we talked yesterday about, the big noon situation and everyone getting up in arms. And, I understand both sides, but I try to be logical on this stuff from a business standpoint and on the most important standpoint, which is the fans who, oftentimes can get screwed, but it's part of the deal of being a sports fan. You lose control unless you just completely stop watching. And when it comes to football, there's no way we're going to stop watching. So it is what it is. But before we dive into some football, let me tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast, Gametime. Here's the thing with Gametime. What do you want to do? Do you want to go to a game? College? Pro? Do you want to go enjoy yourself? Is your team making a playoff push? Do you want to go to an NBA game, an NHL game? NHL games, they are, television does not do them justice. It really does not. Went to my first one a couple years ago. I'm like, this is awesome. Then Salt Lake City stole the NHL team here, which, whatever, I'd only gone to one game, and I don't even pretend to be a fan. But if you live in an area with an NHL team, I highly recommend going to a game, especially if you got a little kid. They would really enjoy it. I mean, it was something I wish I would have done more. Definitely when I lived in Philly and when I lived in the Bay Area when the Sharks were good. But you want to go to a concert, a comedy show, do it and do it on us because it's the easiest app to use. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I think we got to give our boy Sirianni some love. Sometimes when you grow to a figure that becomes so polarizing, it's hard to shake. Like, in a weird way, the dude had a lot of success, but last year ended so crazy. And then this year, the moment with the Browns fans, or when he's playing the Browns with the home fans, it was like everyone talked about him, and I'm guilty too, like he's Jim Tom Sula. And then you look up, and he's hosting Thursday Night Football, and his team's 7-2. And over the last 4 games, they have outscored their opponent 127-49. And 23 of those points came against the Jags, where they were up 22-0. So in his 4-game winning, or I guess 5-game winning streak, but if you remove that Browns game, which got weird, he's averaging over 30 points a game as a head coach. His team looks good. I said it coming into the season. And one thing, and I learn this every year, but definitely I am going to, when we discuss in August next year, how important your head coach is. I mean, betting on the Saints when Dennis Allen was their head coach, what was I doing? Like, how insane was I? So when your head coach or even saying, like, my take should have been, yeah, the Bears, they have some talent, but, they're probably a 6-win team. And I think I was probably closer, like, they can win 8-9 games. They're not winning 8-9 games with Matt Eberflus. What the fuck was I talking about? The thing with Sirianni is Like, I don't think he's a great head coach, but they have such a well-run organization. They have so much talent. They add two really good coordinators, and adding Saquon Barkley, their offense is loaded. So if Jalen is just solid, if you add Saquon and he's healthy, like they're gonna be a dominant offense. They just are, because you got AJ Brown, who's one of the best wide receivers. You have Devontae Smith, who's one of the best young players in the league. They have a really good tight end. Saquon's an elite back. And offensive line, like they draft those guys every single year. So even when guys get injured, they're able to mix and match. And they have an elite offensive line coach who probably makes, my guess, Jeff Stoutland makes a couple $1 million. So this Sirianni, while he's very fun to talk about, like he wins tomorrow and the Eagles are favored, he'll be 8-2. And they will be right on the heels of the Detroit Lions, headed into the stretch run of the season. So we can make fun of him all we want, and he takes a lot of shit. Here's the one thing, though, when you work in Philly as a head coach, you do, like, it's a tough place to play. Like, he's been feeling pressure the moment he started, whatever, 4 years ago. So, like, all the pressure in this game is on the Eagles. All of the pressure. 100% of the pressure is to win this game at home. You could argue there's even more pressure on the Washington owner than there is on the actual team, because that's an underrated elephant in the room, that the dude that owns the Sixers also owns the Commanders. And I've said this before, forever the Commanders were such a joke with Dan Snyder, it didn't matter. But they're not a joke anymore. Now they're good. And now it's like, wait, you own our basketball team, but you own, like, the Commanders, if they just are good now for the foreseeable future, which I think you'd be hard pressed to argue against them, I don't know, being good for a while, that this rivalry is going to be a little weird for the dude. It's like, wait, you're trying to take out our football team, our prized possession? I mean, the Eagles in Philly are the equivalent of like Alabama football in Tuscaloosa or LSU football in Baton Rouge. And the other sports are massive, but there is nothing like this football team. And after I think everyone was on edge about a month ago, rightfully so, it was getting weird. You got to be feeling pretty good. I know you've been beating the crap out of bad teams, but that's the key. You've been beating the crap out of bad teams. And I remember when the Bears did it, everyone's like, the Bears. It's like, let's see Caleb play against some good teams. Like, I have seen the Eagles guys when they're playing well against other high-level competition. It works. And I think tomorrow, like, I like the Eagles kind of big. Like, I like them and the points. It wouldn't shock me at all if they win this game by 10-plus points. And listen, I think Washington's playing with house money. They have had a phenomenal season. I mean, they really have. It's already a win. They've won 7 games. Their quarterback looks like a future star. Currently, he's got 9 touchdowns, only 2 picks. He got another 4 rushing. Their schedule actually sets up pretty nice. They still play the Cowboys twice, who just stink. They still play the Titans. They play the Saints. Like, they could get rolled in this game, and it's still very, very conceivable that they get to 11 wins. But I'd argue if they went 10-7 in Jayden's rookie year, and whether that got them the 6 seed or the 7 seed, that's one of the more impressive seasons, especially the franchise that they just took over, we have seen in a long, long time. Really. I mean, remember, like, when Dan Campbell got to Detroit with Jared Goff, they went 3-13. They were really, really bad. Usually, like, these turnarounds take a little while. Adam Peters, who came from the 49ers, like, I saw him and John Lynch when they got there in 17. They were a horrendous football team for 2 years before they broke out in 2019 and were in the Super Bowl. So if Washington wins 10 games, gets to the playoffs, standing ovation as a football fan. What a season. But, like, this is a type game. And I know, like, Dan Quinn and Jayden and the team don't feel like this, but this is just a reality. They're playing with house money in this game. All of the pressure's on Philly. And I do think Nick Sirianni has, with, his team, have just quieted everyone. Like, people in Philly are coming into this game excited, not like on the fence of something bad's going to happen. The expectation coming into this building is we're going to kick ass and take names. And if they play well, it's crazy how, this is part of sports. It's very fickle. We'll talk about Anthony Richardson. Things can change very, very quickly. And at the end of the day, Sirianni is going to be judged in the playoffs, especially if he doesn't have the number 1 seed. Like, what's it going to take for him to get a contract extension? Does one playoff win get it for him? I don't know. Does two? It'd be hard to not give a guy a contract extension if he took the team to the NFC Championship game, especially if you had to go on the road to Detroit and lose. Like, you'd be an underdog in that game. But I think if you're an Eagles fan, you're feeling pretty good. You're young players. I mean, Cooper DeJean's making plays. Obviously, the two defensive linemen, starting with Jalen Carter, has been awesome. Nolan Smith has been a factor. Nakobe Dean. I mean, these are young core guys on defense, and we know how awesome the offense can look. So, let's face it, I would say two of the best, if not the best, especially when you factor in the price, offseason additions have been Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. I mean, those guys have been certified ass kickers. They've been unstoppable forces. And while Derrick's, probably a Hall of Famer and definitely adding to that resume, if he wasn't, he's much closer now and will be if he plays like this for a couple years with the Ravens. No one's ever argued that Saquon's not a Hall of Fame talent, right? The argument when what's his name drafted him number 2 overall wasn't like this guy is one of, if not the best player in the draft. It's, do you draft a running back that high? And I understood more so like, I don't think you draft a running back that high. But when you're the Eagles and you get an opportunity to get a guy with a chip on his shoulder, it's just made their offense so much more well-rounded. And he's just an elite game-changing player. So I like the Eagles in this game. I'm excited for this game. I mean, last week was awesome. Ravens, Bengals, you get these division games. Obviously, the Bengals record isn't good, but we know, like, when they play like that they are tough out. And I would expect a very, very entertaining game. And this is the good part about, the league wanting, I mean, they're in bed with Amazon, but wanting to make this real is you give them better games. And I think as the season went on years ago in this package, these games were such a joke. The matchups were so terrible. And now they're pretty good. Like, there's just no disputing this is a good matchup. So I go to next week. The game is, so we got Washington at Philly this week. Next week, we got Pittsburgh at Cleveland, which I guess could be worse. Then we got Thanksgiving games. Then week 14, we got Green Bay at Detroit. That's pretty freaking unbelievable. One thing that this league does a good job of is the game after Thanksgiving. They take two of the best teams on Thanksgiving Day and make them play the next Thursday. So you get a Thursday game, then you get another Thursday game, but it's actually a normal week. And then the week after Lions, Packers is Rams at San Francisco. I mean, that's pretty good back-to-back stretch talking early December. The NFL season is rolling along, and contenders are starting to separate from the pack. But one thing has not changed, and that's DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And it's the number one place to do what I love to do, bet some touchdowns. Whether it's a fade, whether it's a Hail Mary, whether it's a sweep or 3 tackles are broken and a dude goes 60 yards, we do not care because we love to bet touchdowns, and DraftKings is the place to do it. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting something as simple as scoring a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your first pick. And here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get 200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get 200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. The Colts. I've been saying this for a while. It is so difficult to be a head coach. You have so many crazy difficult decisions. It's like any human you ever meet in management, when you just talk about, a CEO, a CFO, someone in a very powerful position, they're really getting paid to make constant decisions. Like, in terms of actual tangible work on a daily basis, it's hard to quantify. They are paid to make decisions. That's what Dan Campbell, Andy Reid, I mean, every head coach in the NFL is doing constantly, all day, every day. And there are 4 or 5 you make on a weekly basis, which are game-changing decisions. And it's so easy as an assistant coach to be like, yeah, we should bench this guy. We need to reinsert this guy in the starting lineup. I've been there. Everyone has those opinions. Scouts, position coaches, the coordinators. but it ultimately falls on the head coach / the GM to be the decision maker, not to give a suggestion, but the one that gives the final say on we're doing this or we're not doing this. So it's like, oh, my suggestion would have been correct. Well, would you have made that decision in that spot? I don't know. And no one ever knows. And that's why, the more experience you have doing something, the more confidence you have in whatever you're doing, I think the better and the more equipped you are to make decisions. And this Anthony Richardson situation got weird. They had to bench him. So it wasn't even the right decision. They had no choice. They would have lost the team. The choice was made for him the moment he tapped out. And Ryan Kelly, their star center, said after the game, like, that's not acceptable. We had a talk with him. It was like, yeah, he's sitting down. Then the decision becomes like, okay, then it's back on your plate a couple weeks later. Why? Over the last 2 games, Joe Flacco's thrown 4 interceptions, and you've lost both games. So it's like, if you're going to lose games, there's no point in playing Joe Flacco, right? If you play this game against the Jets, who are fucking terrible, who are just an absolute embarrassment to the sport, and you lose with Joe Flacco, 1, at 4-7, your season's over. And 2, it feels like you wasted the opportunity, right? So you're playing the Jets, and you're Shane Steichen, and you go, the Jets defense is horrendous. They can't stop anybody. Well, our running back's a baller, and we feel comfortable that he can go for 120, 130 on him, no problem. Well, the one thing our quarterback actually does pretty well is run the ball. So if we reinsert Anthony Richardson, here's what I would do if I was Shane Steichen. And I don't pretend to know more football than him. But I did see a guy who most of us consider one of the best offensive coaches in the league insert Malik Willis into a game week 2 this year and win with them throwing way less than 20 passes. Why not have a game plan that limits what you ask him to do? And I've seen a lot of Colts fans get mad at Shane Steichen because they go, why is he asking him to throw the ball so much? I don't know. Honestly, just hand the ball off, run the ball, and throw it occasionally. And to me, that would be the game plan. Anything less than 30 rush attempts between Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor against the Jets is a massive failure. Honestly, you should probably be about 35-40, and that includes the other running backs on the team as well. This should be a game we're going to try to win 17-10. The Jets offense stinks. Control the clock and run the ball basically every play. Hey, Jets, we're going to run the ball. We don't think you could stop it. Why do you think that? Because you can't. I mean, and this is a pretty big moment for Shane Steichen's career. Because if Anthony Richardson comes back and he keeps doing the same things he's been doing, and they're just throwing it all the time, he's really inaccurate, I think we got to start asking ourselves, is he a little over his head as a head coach? Because I know he's a good play caller. But as a play caller, there's way less on your table. It's like, now that I'm getting married and I've lived with her for a couple of years, you realize there are positives to having someone else in the house. You can balance what she has to do, what I have to do. So she's good at some things, I'm good at some things. I don't have to do it all. If you live in a house all by yourself, literally everything's on you. The cooking, the cleaning, the putting this away, the laundry, everything. And as a coordinator, all you have to do is focus on a couple things because other people handle that stuff. As the head coach, it all falls on you. And you just have to wonder, I think this is going to be a big time. If I own the Colts, this is kind of a defining moment. Anthony Richardson even said, listen, I needed that. I'm glad that happened. Everything he said was right. And I don't know if he's coached up to say the right things, but listen, his quotes were right on par with what you would want. So we got to take a step back, got to take a deep breath, got a little sense of humility. I saw a play last week where they got a first down. He was into the game. I forget who it was. I think a receiver. It could have been Jonathan Taylor. And he was right on the sideline. He's right there with him. So he was excited. So you just hope, you just sometimes take a deep breath. And he also, like Shane Steichen, get a chance at redemption. Best part about life. Another day comes up. If you're miserable today, tomorrow's a new day. Right? If you fucked up today, tomorrow's a day to not. And get it moving in the right direction. The world moves on. So I'm actually excited to watch this. And as a gambler, this is an auto bet. I would basically take any team beside maybe like the Panthers and the Giants right now against the Jets. And I just wouldn't even bet those games. Not saying that they wouldn't cover, but you give me points with any team in the NFL beside like three or four of them. I would say like this Cowboy Cooper Rush version, the Panthers, the Giants. I think you're giving me more than a field goal. And this morning it was like 3.5, 4 points. Automatic bet. Auto bet. You just bet against the Jets. And I think I saw Rodgers say today that he plans on coming back next year. And I think a lot of people think he would quit. I just think like if you can still physically play, even if you're not the same, I understand he's made a lot of money. I'm sure he's got a lot in the bank. There are only so many places where you can make $35, $40 million a year. And that's what he's making right now. So if you're like, well, my body can still handle it. Should I make another $40 million a year? Because you make the $40 million whether you win 6 games or whether you win 11. But he's no dummy. Like, I'm probably never making $40 million a year doing a job. Maybe I'll make it over investments or maybe it's some building I bought. But I think it's as black and white as that. On top of like, listen, it's probably fun playing football. I'm guilty of this. Is during the trade deadline or during the off season, like, hey, so and so team traded for this player. It cost them a 5th-round pick. It cost them a 6th-round pick. Why didn't my team trade for that guy? We were unwilling to give up the pick. And I understand that argument always. It's like, are we serious? Most of these 5th-round picks are not only not going to make the team, no one's ever going to hear these guys. Maybe they'll be on the practice squad. The problem is enough guys turn into Deommodore Lenoir, who Sherman's had on his podcast, who the 49ers 4 years ago drafted in the 5th round. He was pick 172. Yesterday, the 49ers gave him a 5-year, $92 million contract extension. That on average is a little over $18 million a year. Now, I haven't seen all the details of the guarantee or whatever, but I'm sure it's not nothing. It's a real contract. Why? He's a real player. He's a high-end starter at outside corner. He can also play nickel, and you can move him all around. He's a very, very good player. And he's the reason that after this season, they'll probably, Charvarius Ward's an unrestricted free agent. He won't be on the team next year. And like when teams think about trading a 4th, 5th, 6th-round pick for established players, they weigh like, well, what if we get our next starting corner? I was with the Eagles when Jason Kelce was drafted in the 6th round. He was a starting center for well over a decade. And obviously you would say Lenoir and clearly Kelce tend to be outliers, but there are enough guys that become longtime starters on the 3rd day of the draft that are the reason these GMs hesitate, especially on good teams, right? Because if I'm the Chiefs, if I'm the Bills, if I'm the Ravens, getting a guy in the 4th or 5th round that starts for me for 3 years is by far the number one economic advantage I can have when I have a high-priced team. Because I get a starting player for essentially the minimum for like $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. And if then that guy becomes a good player like Lenoir, it's like I struck oil. It truly is incredible because even the 5-year, $92 million contract, if you factor in his first 4 years in the league, over like, even if he doesn't make it the full 9, let's say he plays 8 years for the 49ers, just cost average that over that period of time. Like I draft Nick Bosa or Myles Garrett number 1 or number 2, and then I give him $100+ million. I still paid him a lot of money when I drafted him really high. But when I draft these guys, really low in the draft and I hit, it's found money. And these examples happen every single year, and the good teams take advantage of those rounds. It's boring, even to me at this time, on TV on Saturday in the draft. Because you never know. Because a guy that you liked in college gets drafted in the 4th round, might not even make the team. And a guy you know nothing about might become their next starting safety for the next 8 years and get $50 million in 3 years from now. It's what makes the draft so fun. It's one of the great unknowns. You have no fucking clue who's going to be sweet. Clearly, if the NFL, and this is like we always say, inexact science, analytics, nothing's ever going to change. Because there's no chance on God's green earth that if Deommodore Lenoir, if every team in the league had any idea he'd be half as good as he turned out to be, he would have made it past like pick 40. But that's never going to change. And that's always what makes the discourse leading up to the draft. And then after the draft, I saw a clip with Deion Sanders yesterday, and he was arguing with some people over, the recruiting classes. And he had actually a pretty good point. He's like, everyone gets on us, for being so aggressive in the transfer portal. But let's just say I signed 20 freshmen out of high school, right? 20 freshmen. So during their freshman year, let's say 3 or 4 of them play for the team. The other, let's say 16 guys redshirt. Well, the following spring during spring practice, if it's pretty clear that maybe 12 of those 16 guys are not even close to playing either, what's going to happen? They're going to enter the transfer portal. So those guys that we just invested a year in and used scholarships on the previous year are now gone heading into their second year. So we have found a balance of maybe less high school guys that we think have a really good chance to play right away and being really aggressive in the transfer portal. That the plan is to plug and play the majority of those guys. And even if they don't end up starting, we know they can play on special teams or whatever. It's like, what, Prime? Makes a lot of sense. Actually, pretty good logic. And I think you just have to adapt your way of thinking when it comes to the draft. Darren Rizzi was talking with Florio, and he essentially had a line. He's the interim coach right now for the Saints. He's the guy that clogged the toilet on his coaching debut, which I think anyone would gladly take a clogged toilet coaching debut victory over a non-clogged toilet loss. So it was well worth it. Makes for a great story. And listen, you probably ate a big dinner, eat a big breakfast, got the nerves flowing, drink a large cold brew, and you gotta clear out the pipes. Nothing like a good feeling of clearing out the pipes on game day morning after a nice large cold brew from Starbucks. But he essentially said that the reason a lot of special teams coaches don't truly get the opportunity either to interview for a head coaching job or when they interview are never taken that seriously because owners and GMs love to win the press conference. You get way more credit if you hire the number one defensive coordinator or the number one offensive coordinator or some star college guy. And he's not wrong. It's a very big deal after you fire a coach to have a positive press conference. That's a fact. But I started thinking think how stupid it is. And I was in the Bay Area when Jim Tomsula gave his press conference. It is by far the most outrageous experience in the history of sports for a non-game. It was like, what just happened? And that obviously reflected everything that was about to happen. All-time disaster, joke, just bad hire. I mean, it's the worst hire, I'd argue, in the history of the league, especially when you factor in you essentially fired Jim Harbaugh for Jim Tomsula. Like, Sirianni's was bad, but obviously since, like, Sirianni went to the Super Bowl. Sirianni's been in the playoffs. Sirianni's headed back to the playoffs and going to probably win the division again. So no one even cares about your press conference. But I do think you get so caught up on a press conference, which is essentially on day one of the guy's employment, when ideally you're hiring this guy for the next 5 to 10 years. And I do wonder sometimes, like, things are fickle, right? Things change all the time in sports, in society, in our personal lives. Like, you grow, your views and your desires change. Like, that's part of life. You're up, you're down, you have different outlooks on different things. And sometimes when something like sexy offensive coordinators are really in vogue, and there are a lot of them, those guys are going to get hired. Especially when you just factor in the economics of the league. You're like, well, who makes the most money? We like the quarterback. Well, who coaches the quarterback? Well, the guy, the offensive coordinator usually is a quarterback guy. You're like, well, shouldn't we make that guy the head coach? Like, there is a lot of logic behind that. And you go, like, who's the best head coach currently in the NFL? You're like, Andy Reid. Well, what's he do? Well, he's an offensive guy, play caller, quarterback genius. You're like, well, wouldn't you want that? Yeah, well, there's also been Belichick. He's a defensive guy, but he actually was pretty good dealing with Brady. And then the other guy, Bill Walsh, who was also a quarterback. Like, it makes sense. But you also have to go off. It's like a draft. What are your options? Right? Like, who are your options? And you go, well, besides Ben Johnson, it's not a great crop, even though I think Liam Cohen's pretty impressive. And I think he will be in this mix for sure. But you go Kubiak, that star is dimmed. Slowick, that star is clearly dimmed. And then you also got Belichick and Vrabel. And I think it got so hot with Kyle and McVay, but it does feel like most of his best guys got hired, right? His best crew with Kyle was McVay, LaFleur. Like, that happened. And you've seen other guys like Robert Saleh, LaFleur's brother who went with him, flame out pretty quick. D'Amico, like, was a coaching star, already hired. Kevin O'Connell, already hired. Raheem Morris, already hired. Mike McDaniel, already hired. Like, that crew's kind of taken. Now, I guess you can go to the new crew. You're like, well, would you be interested in Brian Griese? You'd be like, well, what's his background? Well, played quarterback in the NFL. His father, quarterback in the NFL for one of the great teams of all time, the Miami Dolphins, undefeated, played for Don Shula. Yeah, he's going to check some boxes. But I also think, like, I wonder if Steve Spagnuolo gets some interviews this offseason. Because we know Vrabel's going to get some interviews this offseason. We know Belichick's going to get some interviews this offseason. I mentioned this the other day, like, keep an eye on Kirby Smart this offseason. So I would go into these situations, and it's kind of crazy to me, and this is why the Bears should fire Eberflus. You essentially fire a guy January 1, and then you just talk to a guy a couple times, and then you just make him the head coach of your organization. Like, I don't care how many frames of reference and people you call or how many times you Google this guy's stats as a coordinator. Feels like not enough information. Like Starbucks, I read this article on the Wall Street Journal the other day that the dude they hired from Chipotle, the CEO from Chipotle, went to Starbucks. And a couple months before he went to Starbucks, they were clearly talking to him. And he would go to random Starbucks, whether it be in a mall, whether it be in the corner of a shopping center, and he would just talk to baristas and ask them questions and pick their brain. And he did this for months, just acquiring information. This is well before he took the job. And my guess would be is like, and they say this a lot, that sometimes coaches interview the team as much as the team interviews the coach, which I would imagine is going to happen with guys like Vrabel, Belichick. It happens sometimes in college, right? I would imagine it happened with Lincoln and Brian Kelly when they left Oklahoma and Notre Dame to go to LSU and USC. Obviously, those haven't worked, but they didn't need to leave. And I think, like, when he took the job at Starbucks, he felt pretty confident that, like, okay, I see some things here that can be fixed, and I think this is plausible, right? Obviously, they made him very rich man. They gave him a signing bonus like he was an athlete. They let him move the headquarters down to Newport Beach. Like, it was a great deal. But sometimes you just take a great deal, even if it's a situation that you can't win. Ask Lincoln Riley how that went. I mean, they gave him $120 million. Did Lincoln, if they would have offered him $60 million, I got news for you. Lincoln Riley's still in Oklahoma. So it's like he just went simply for the money. Where Brian Kelly got paid a lot of money, but I think it's pretty clear Brian Kelly thought he could win a national championship at LSU. And do you know what it turns out? Like, it's actually easier in a 12-team playoff to do it at Notre Dame, who is going to make the playoffs with a fucking loss to NIU. And LSU is not going to sniff the playoffs. So I just think we got to be careful about, like, and I'm not saying I wouldn't be inclined and try to hire these offensive guys. Like, I would interview Brian Griese. I would say, well, who's McVay's right-hand guy right now on offense? Who's LaFleur leaning on in Green Bay? I would want to interview those. But I would go into these situations open-minded. Like, who is the best candidate? Because winning the press conference, think how irrelevant that is. Like, does any Green Bay Packer fan remember Matt LaFleur's press conference? I don't remember Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay's press conference. Did Kansas City win the press conference when they hired Andy Reid a couple weeks after he just got fired from Philadelphia? I doubt it. Does any Chiefs fan remember that press conference? Of course not. That opening press conference is so irrelevant. I don't know anything about Rizzy, but if he's clearly as impressive as like seems like a pretty high level guy, I'd interview him. Why not? And like he said, like obviously some special teams coach, Joe Judge went bad. Some have gone well. John Harbaugh. I would say Joe Judge, a good example. Clearly over his head. John Harbaugh was not. And last but not least, Netflix. They've sold out their ads on Christmas. And I think, for most of my life, the NFL really had one holiday, and that was Thanksgiving, in which they still own. Like Thanksgiving Day, you're sitting around and football's on in the background. Maybe you go for, depending on how old you are, right? Maybe you're outside messing with your buddies. The older you get, maybe you're inside drinking with your family. As you get kids, maybe you're outside playing in the front yard, but football is on the TV, at least in my house, since as long as I can remember, since I was a young kid. And that was back in the day when maybe there were 2 games. Then they've added this third game, and you just got football on the TV. And that was their day. And Martin Luther King Day was the NBA's day, and Christmas was the NBA's day. And the NFL has come flying in and said, no mas. Those are my days. I've stolen those days. I mean, you look at Christmas. That is now the NFL's territory. That's their real estate. Christmas Eve, also their real estate. New Year's, depending on where it falls. They're going to play on that day. And I think Netflix is the perfect partner for this because the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight is happening this weekend. It was supposed to happen a while ago, and then Tyson got injured. He's 58 years old. I think your first reaction is like, that's kind of stupid. Though I've watched a couple Jake Paul's fights, and listen, I kind of like stupid sometimes. I'm gonna watch. I watched Mike Tyson. I think the fight Roy Jones. I think it was like the pre-fight for when Jake Paul. I forget who Jake Paul was fighting. Not Hulk Hogan, but like some famous random guy, and won. But I'm pretty sure that Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. fought. That's when it was pay-per-view. I bought it. I remember thinking, like, God, I think Tyson, at the time he was like 55 or 54. I actually thought he looked pretty good. And who knows, 58. It's clearly hard for him to train, his body, injuries and stuff. But the point is, that thing's going to get a lot of eyeballs. The Tom Brady roast was a major, major success. And that's the thing with the NFL, is it's like the ultimate just kind of event, even though it's just a random regular season games. Because football games always feel big because there aren't that many of them. And there's always a build up to those games. There was a build up to the roast, which far exceeded my expectations. There's obviously been a long build up to this Tyson Jake Paul fight, which you can convince me anything's going to happen. But guess what? It's going to get me interested. It's going to get me to watch. Honestly, might even bet on it. Don't even hate Mike Tyson in the upset. But I think that the NFL and Netflix feel like they're kind of made for each other right now.